Barron Trump's unexpected speech at his father's inauguration left an entire nation speechless. What he said might just change everything. The atmosphere outside the Capitol was buzzing with anticipation, a mixture of exhilaration and uncertainty. The swearing-in of Donald Trump as the 47th President of the United States was an event that had sparked both hope and division across the nation. As the crowd of thousands cheered and waved their flags, cameras panned over familiar faces. The Trump family stood together, projecting unity and strength in the face of a contentious political landscape. The spotlight, however, was firmly fixed on Donald Trump himself, delivering his second inaugural address. The booming cadence of his voice filled the air as he outlined his vision for the next 4 years, a speech full of the boldness and confidence his supporters had come to expect. But even as his words echoed, there was an undercurrent of tension. The country he addressed was one where divides had deepened, and reconciliation seemed like a distant dream. As Trump finished his address and stepped back from the podium, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. The camera zoomed in on his family, their faces a study in pride and composure. Melania Trump, poised and regal, stood next to her youngest son, Barron, who had grown into a striking figure over the years. At 18, Barron was nearly 7 feet tall, his height commanding attention even as he remained characteristically quiet and reserved. And then, something unexpected happened. As the applause began to wane, Barron Trump, dressed in a sharp black suit, stepped forward. His movement was subtle at first, as though he was testing the waters. The crowd's cheers softened into murmurs of curiosity. People exchanged puzzled looks, unsure of what was about to unfold. Even his family seemed momentarily taken aback. Donald Trump glanced at his son with an expression that was equal parts surprise and curiosity. Barron adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and approached the podium. The microphones caught the faint sound of his breath as he leaned in. The murmurs faded into silence. The youngest Trump, who had spent most of his life in the shadow of his father's larger-than-life persona, was about to address the nation for the first time. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. This was no longer just a political ceremony. It was something different, something unexpected. Barron's expression was calm but focused, his presence radiating an air of quiet determination. He scanned the crowd, his eyes steady as if searching for something or someone. Today, he began, his voice steady but soft, is a day that marks not just a new chapter for my father, but for all of us. The crowd leaned in, drawn to his words. What was he going to say? Why now? These questions hung heavy in the air, but Barron's composure silenced any doubts. What came next, however, was beyond what anyone could have imagined. Barron's speech would not only steal the spotlight but also spark a conversation that would ripple across the country. Barron's voice, steady yet deliberate, seemed to carry the weight of the moment. Today is about more than celebrating a presidency, he began, pausing briefly as if to measure his words carefully. It's about looking inward and asking ourselves, what kind of country do we want to be? The crowd, still unsure of what was unfolding, remained eerily quiet. A mix of curiosity and tension filled the air. Barron's tone was not grandiose like his father's, nor polished like a career politician's. It was something different, raw, reflective, and deeply personal. He continued speaking, not as the son of a president, but as a young man grappling with the challenges he had witnessed firsthand. I've spent much of my life watching from the sidelines, he admitted, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Watching arguments on TV, reading about people who feel unheard, and listening to stories from both sides of the divide. And for a long time, I stayed silent, thinking it wasn't my place to speak. His admission struck a chord with many in the audience, especially the younger members who often feel overshadowed in political discourse. Barron then shifted his words, taking on a tone of quiet determination. But staying silent hasn't solved anything. In fact, it's only made things worse. We've let anger and fear define us for too long, and it's tearing us apart. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Barron pressed on, unshaken. He spoke of the divisions that had consumed the nation, political, cultural, generational, and the toll they had taken. Yet he didn't dwell on the problems. Instead, he turned his focus to solutions, offering a vision that was surprisingly mature for someone so young. "We don't have to agree on everything," he said, his voice growing steadier with each word. "But we do have to agree on one thing, that the future we want for this country is worth fighting for. And that starts not with shouting, but with listening." The weight of his message seemed to settle over the crowd. People shifted in their seats, their expressions ranging from surprise to admiration. Barron's words were not what anyone had expected. They weren't politically charged or rehearsed. They were personal, reflective, and surprisingly hopeful. And then came the moment that would etch itself into the minds of everyone present. Barron, pausing for a breath, glanced back at his family before turning to face the crowd. With a quiet but resolute tone, he said, "We're all responsible for the state of this nation. And we all have the power to make it better, not by waiting for someone else to fix it, but by starting with ourselves." For a brief second, the silence was deafening. The enormity of his words hung in the air, as if the crowd was collectively processing the gravity of what they had just heard. Barron, unflinching, closed his remarks with a poignant message. "If my generation is to inherit this country, I ask only one thing: let us inherit a country we can be proud of." As he stepped back from the podium, the silence lingered, an eerie, awe-filled moment where time seemed to stand still. And then, slowly but surely, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't the explosive kind that followed a campaign rally or political victory. It was measured, thoughtful, almost reverent. Barron Trump, the boy who had spent much of his life in the background, had just delivered a message that felt as much like a challenge as it did a plea. And the nation, for once, seemed willing to listen. But as the applause echoed through the Capitol, the question remained: would Barron's words be remembered as a fleeting moment of clarity, or would they spark a deeper shift in the country's heart? A teenager trying to figure out who he was. Friends from his more recent time at New York University's STUNS School of Business spoke about his curiosity and drive to understand the world around him. He was always reading, always asking questions, one peer revealed. He didn't shy away from tough topics. He wanted to understand why people thought the way they did, even when their opinions clashed with his own. Behind closed doors, Barron had reportedly been contemplating this moment for months. According to a family friend, he had been deeply affected by the divisions he saw in the country and the criticism his family received. He knew people had preconceived notions about him just because of his last name, the source said. He wanted to show the world who he really was. The decision to speak at his father's inauguration wasn't made lightly. Barron had spent weeks crafting his remarks, poring over drafts, and seeking feedback from a small circle of confidants. He wanted every word to reflect his own thoughts and values, free from the influence of political strategists or family members. This was his moment, a close friend shared. He wasn't trying to represent his father or the administration, he was speaking as himself. Even his demeanor during the speech, calm, composed, but deeply earnest, spoke volumes about his internal process. Barron was not the boisterous or charismatic type, but his quiet confidence carried its own weight. Body language experts who later analyzed his speech noted his deliberate pauses and measured gestures, suggesting someone who was keenly aware of the impact of his words. Yet, for all his preparation, Barron also understood the risk. He knew his speech would be scrutinized, that his motives would be questioned, and that he might even face backlash. But he chose to speak anyway, driven by a belief that even the smallest spark of hope was worth igniting. "If I can make one person feel heard," he had reportedly told a friend, "then it's worth it." Barron's mindset reflected a rare blend of introspection and courage. He wasn't trying to prove himself or make a grand statement. He simply wanted to be honest, to bridge a gap he felt had grown too wide. And in doing so, he managed to capture the attention of a nation that, for once, seemed willing to pause and listen. But as Barron's motivations became clearer, the bigger question loomed: could his message survive the harsh realities of public discourse, or would it be drowned out by the noise of cynicism and division? The impact of Barron's speech was immediate and far-reaching, spreading well beyond the confines of the Capitol steps. In the days following the inauguration, it became the centerpiece of national conversations. political analysts, social commentators, and everyday citizens all found themselves grappling with the weight of his words. Some called it a rare moment of clarity in an increasingly polarized world, while others viewed it as fleeting idealism. Regardless of opinion, one thing was certain: Barron Trump had sparked something that couldn't be ignored. Across the country, small but meaningful changes began to take shape. In San Diego, a group of high school students launched a community forum where people of differing political views could come together to discuss local issues. Inspired by Barron's emphasis on listening, they invited guest speakers from all walks of life to share their perspectives, fostering dialogue in a way that felt genuine and unforced. If someone like Barron can speak up in such a big moment, we can definitely do it here in our own backyard, one student organizer shared. In Cincinnati, a grassroots campaign called Common Ground emerged, aimed at bringing together neighbors divided by political affiliations. The organizers cited Barron's speech as their inspiration, using his words about starting with ourselves as their slogan. Weekly meetings were held in coffee shops and libraries, where attendees shared personal stories instead of debating political policies. The initiative gained traction quickly, proving that even small acts of unity could have a profound impact. On social media, the ripple effect was equally significant. Young people, often criticized for political apathy, began using platforms like TikTok and Instagram to share their reflections on Barron's message. Videos tagged with #BarronSpeechChallenge encouraged participants to highlight ways they could personally contribute to bridging divides, from volunteering at shelters to mentoring younger students. The hashtag amassed millions of views, turning an isolated speech into a viral movement. But not all reactions were positive. Critics accused Barron's speech of being out of touch, arguing that someone raised in privilege could never fully grasp the struggles faced by ordinary Americans. A prominent political commentator dismissed his words as well-intentioned but naive, claiming they offered little in the way of concrete solutions. This backlash sparked a counter-response, with supporters pointing out that the power of Barron's speech lay not in policy but in its message of hope. Within the Trump family, the ripple effect was equally evident. Melania Trump reportedly expressed pride in her son's courage, calling his speech a reflection of his heart. His older siblings, known for their active roles in their father's political ventures, seemed genuinely moved by Barron's decision to carve his own path. "He's always been the quiet one," Eric Trump told a journalist, "but when he speaks, you listen." Even Donald Trump, who had built his career on commanding the spotlight, appeared to step aside momentarily to let his youngest son shine. While he refrained from publicly commenting on the speech, sources close to the family revealed that the former president had privately praised Barron's poise and sincerity. He knew it was Barron's moment, one insider shared, and he respected that. As the weeks passed, Barron's speech continued to ripple through various sectors of society. Universities included excerpts of his remarks in leadership seminars. Churches and synagogues referenced his call for unity in sermons. Even corporations began using his message in team-building exercises, emphasizing the importance of empathy and understanding in the workplace. These ripples, while small in scale, carried an undeniable energy. They served as a reminder that change doesn't always come from sweeping reforms or dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it begins with a single voice. A voice willing to stand up and say, "We can do better." But as the ripple spread, a lingering question remained: could this momentum lead to lasting change, or would it fade into memory like so many moments before? As the echoes of Barron Trump's speech faded, the deeper meaning behind his words began to settle into the minds of those who had heard them. At its core, his message wasn't about politics, power, or family legacy. It was about the simple yet profound act of connection. It was about choosing understanding over division, compassion over indifference, and courage over complacency. Barron's speech challenged everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs, to reflect on their own role in the state of the nation. His call to start with ourselves resonated because it placed the responsibility for change not on some distant leader or government policy but on each individual. It was a message that transcended political ideologies and reminded people of their shared humanity. "If we can't find common ground," Barron had said, "then the cracks will only grow deeper." This idea struck a particularly powerful chord in a world where polarization often feels insurmountable. Barron didn't offer a solution to every problem, nor did he pretend to have all the answers. Instead, he did something far more impactful. He reminded people that change starts small, with a conversation, a gesture, or even just a moment of listening. The moral message of his speech was especially poignant for younger generations. Many saw themselves in Barron, a young person trying to make sense of a world filled with anger and noise. His words empowered them to believe that their voices, no matter how small, could make a difference. One teenager from Arizona shared on social media, "I'm just one person, but Barron made me realize that one person can start a ripple that turns."